Hi, my name is Gökhan Özertan. I'm a professor at Boğaziçi University. We're going to talk about climate change, making cities heroes. I would like to introduce our guests. First, İstanbul Technical University Meteorology Professor Yurdanur Ünal. Since 1995, she's been a professor at Meteorology and Engineering Department of Istanbul Technical University. Her areas of work are global climate model simulation today and tomorrow, regional simulation, and high-resolution analysis in Turkey. She has several national and international projects, and she is consulting students in her field. The second speaker is Burak Gürkan, Turkey, Middle East, and Northern Cyprus representative of Quds Force, and he is a graduate of Physics Department of Middle East Technical University, and then in 2015, in Turkey and South Caspian regions, he became the general manager, and he has been working at Grumpos since then, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Northern Cyprus. He starts in charge of these cities, and in 2018, with the development of the region, he becomes in charge of Turkey, Northern Cyprus. The third speaker is Gamze Çelik Yılmaz. She is a senior climate change analyst. She is working in projects in the Ministry of Environment. She is working as a specialist, and she also is working for UNFCCC as a specialist for review of reports, and currently she is working in the project for developing strategies for low carbon emission. The next speaker is Shannon McDaniel. Dr. Shannon McDaniel is the Data Strategy Director, working in climate change, nuclear sciences, virology, detector engineering for public spaces, using neutrons she is in charge of several research projects, and she also has a doctoral degree in space sciences. And the last speaker is from UNDP Turkey, climate resilience and earthquake risk analysis specialist. Erdem Ergin is a specialist in climate change resilience. He is at UNDP Turkey. He works as a specialist there in Rome University. He is working as a visiting professor in this field, and Venice International University is another university where he coordinates the summer school on the subject. In the last 5 years, he has been working in Turkey, and he is working on making cities more resilient against risk factors. He is a graduate of Middle East Technical University, Department of Chemical Engineering. He also did his postdoctoral studies at George Washington University. He also studied at Harvard University on resilience of cities. Now, I would like to give brief information about this session. After the presentations are over, if you have any questions, you can use your mobile app, and you can go to our session on your mobile app. There is a Q&A section there. You can go to the Q&A section, and you can write to which speaker you are asking this question to. You can submit your question via the app. We will have 15 minutes of Q&A after the questions, after the presentations, and I will be submitting your questions to the speakers. Let's start with you, Yurdanur, Professor Yurdanur. The microphone is actually off. If somebody could warn the speaker. Yes, it's on now. Thank you very much, sir. Now, I would like to move from the global scale to the city scale in this presentation. My slides are in English. Most of the participants are Turkish, so I will speak in Turkish. First of all, what is climate change? In fact, it is the long-term shift in the statistics of the weather in a particular region. It could be a very long-term, like hundreds of years. For instance, when we look at the distribution of temperature at the global scale, we experienced this in the last decades. We have been experiencing these changes of temperature. We have been subject to very hot climates, very warm weather, record high temperatures. First, I would like to make some reminders. We will look at the processes that lead to climate change. One is the natural process. For instance, in hundreds of thousands of years, on the left-hand side, the orbital parameters of the world change, leading to a climate change at the global scale, or there may be volcanic eruptions, and right in the aftermath of that, in a few years, there may be a decline in temperatures. It's down to 0.7 degrees sometimes. Or when we look at a broader time scale, the movement of land masses can also lead to a climate change worldwide. The past earthquake records show us that there has never been a fixed climate in the world, but in recent years, we see that there is a very fast change in the climate in the world, and that is human impact. One of the main effects here is the greenhouse effect, their presence in the atmosphere and their increase. In fact, the greenhouse in the atmosphere is the reason why we exist in the world, why life exists in the world, but today's problem is that this greenhouse gas is increasing today. And there is a change in the use of land that changes surface areas. For instance, deforestation is one reason, or creating urban spaces. So that is one other reason. And the gas that we release to the atmosphere is important. For instance, carbon dioxide has this global warming potential of 1, and chlorofluorocarbons, which are much less in the atmosphere, they have 10,000s of warming potential. And this means that when we live in the city environment, we have to be careful about the emission of such gases. As for modeling and observations, is it the natural causes or anthropogenic causes? Climate scientists can test this using certain models. This is from the last report of IPCC from 2013. We have two graphs here. One is the brown, the other is blue. In fact, blue is just the natural causes, and the brown is the anthropogenic causes of this climate change. And we see that there is this increase in anthropogenic causes. It is 95% of anthropogenic causes based on the last report of IPCC. And in general, in the global scale, we can see the temperature differences. We see the differences in temperature at the top and precipitation at the bottom, and we can see how much increase there will be. The left-hand scenario is optimistic. At the end of the century, the temperature will be less than 2 degrees based on this scenario. All the other scenarios are showing that it's more than 2 degrees. You can see that there is a very high heat value, especially in the polar regions, and that leads to melting in that region, increasing the sea level. You see the sea level changes in these graphs starting from the left. This covers a huge time span. That's what we see. There's no pointer here, right? And in the small box, we see the last 10 years and the changes in the last 10 years. As you see, in fact, there is this increase in sea level that is going on, and we can see the global distribution of this at the bottom. You can see the optimistic and pessimistic scenarios. The pessimistic scenario says that it is about 1 meter of increase at the sea level at the end of the century, more or less. And what's important is that, top left graph, the coastal zones, and the impact there is much bigger. In the coastal zones, there is a certain change, and we see this on the right-hand side. It's about 50-60%. The settlement in the coastal zone will be affected by the sea level change. And of course, this change in sea level is not about the rise of the sea. It's not just limited to that. At the same time, storm activities get more intense, and the coastal zones, there is a huge harm. For instance, there is 1 centimeter of increase, and that leads to a 100-fold impact or change. And most of the cities globally are in the coastal zone. And right now it's 55% of the world's population living in cities. And by 2050, this is expected to reach 9 billion, this population. Of course, what matters is not just the changes in average. In the last 100 years, as per 2017, there is 1 degree of temperature increase on average, but there are extremes, and these extremes are changing more significantly, and in the city environment, this increases the risks. For instance, the rising sea levels and storm surges, the heat stress or drought, these are some of the climate change related risks in the urban areas. One of the important points is the urban heat island concept, because with urbanization, the surface character is changing and the atmosphere and surface exchange is changing. And we see the urban heat island concept in this respect. The increase of the city atmosphere compared to the rural areas nearby is higher because the materials used in the surface absorb the sunlight during the day, and throughout the night it releases them, making the environment warmer. That's why in cities this is becoming an important point, this urban heat island. I want to talk about Istanbul in particular. Istanbul is one of the big metropolitan cities. It's the 15th biggest in the world, and it's the largest metropolitan city in Turkey. There is more than 14 million population, and it's rapidly increasing. As of 1970s, there is an increase of urbanization. As for the urban heat island, we see the stations of Akom on the left, and we see the temperature in the city center is much higher. As for the left-hand side, we see the satellite data, and the observation shows the same thing. This is Istanbul Technical University campus observation. We had some observations on the same day, and the sea level temperature was about 22 degrees, whereas it was about 50 degrees on the asphalt, on the tar. There are some changes in the extreme events. The heat waves are increasing and cold waves are decreasing both in summer and winter in Istanbul. The same is true for precipitation. The average precipitation changes not much, but when we look at the extremes, the changes in the extreme precipitation is increasing rapidly in Istanbul, especially in autumn. What can we do? What are the mitigation scenarios? What kind of strategies can we develop in a city environment? One of the most natural means is to increase the albedo rate of urban structures, that is using materials that have high reflective power, or we can use the green wall strategies. I want to show some examples. This is a study that we conducted in Istanbul. We had some regional simulations. The roofs, walls, we increased their albedo. green walls, green roofs. That's what we created, and there was about 1 degree of temperature decline as a result of this kind of intervention or mitigation strategy. Or another approach is forestation. You can have forestation in empty spaces rather than putting buildings, erecting buildings. You can go for forestation, and this has cooling capacity. But the city population is increasing, and there are different strategies that we need to pursue. We have 2 different strategies that we tested. One is horizontal development scenario, and the other is the vertical development scenario. There are some empty zones, and we placed buildings of different heights. We had their atmospheric simulations, and the other is for low-level buildings, right? We raised 2 floors, or we raised 2 floors in low and medium-level buildings. As for the first one, there is about 9 million population capacity, and the other one is 1.9 million population, the vertical development scenario. And the other scenario in the vertical is about 6 million population. In general, the horizontal development scenario increases the temperatures up to 3 degrees Celsius, mainly over the areas which are covered by buildings and their vicinity. I will finish in 1 minute. As for the vertical development scenario, although in terms of earthquake for Istanbul, this is one of the points to consider, but when we look at the vertical development scenarios, the increase in urban heat island is much more limited. It's about 1 degree Celsius. And what if there were no urbanization in Istanbul? We did what-if analysis. If all urban areas are replaced by forests, what would happen? If there were forests instead of buildings, what would happen? On the right-hand side, we see the results. By setting up the city here, in fact, we're increasing the ambient temperature up to 5 degrees Celsius. This is just one snapshot. During the day, it can go up to 7 degrees Celsius. These are my results, but I won't talk about those. I just want to talk about this point. In order to solve this problem, we need very good data sets to begin with. In order to define the problem, we have to carry out analysis first. What is the intensity, and how can we prevent it? So we should first collect the data. Unfortunately, our data is not much when it comes to the cities, and one of the important points is the city is continuing to develop as we conduct these studies. In order to sustain these studies, we need more collaboration, more collective efforts, like we need city planners, meteorology engineers, architects, civil engineers, economists, and social scientists. They should all work together in order to generate solutions. Thank you. I will quickly ask a few questions. Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. You touched upon this actually, but over time, what are the things that we can do? What is the priority? Where is the priority? I mean, this is an inevitable fact. There is climate change, and it has an impact on everyone. We have seen previous IPCC reports. They were using more conservative language, but now even that language has changed, and it's more severe. So we understand this is important globally, and its intensity is increasing, and this is verified by the IPCC reports too. So what is our priority or urgency areas, and what are things that can wait for later? Well, first, when you look at the IPCC reports, there are some estimates at the global level. Where will the global climate evolve in the future? At the city scale, there are some measures in order to mitigate damages. So you have to examine at the city level. For example, in terms of climate, we need high resolution climate simulations, for instance. or we have to use city-level models to come up with mitigation strategies. For instance, for precipitation or temperature, if we can see this better at small scale, we can get better measures. For instance, today, even 30 millimeters of rainfall reaches to the surface in a very short period of time, and it can lead to flooding. So the infrastructure problems are very important as well, because the basins that collect water, they're ready concrete and it goes to the seas, and there is also the same infrastructure for drought or water shortage. And we talk about air pollution, for instance, and there is the greenhouse gas released to the atmosphere. So in combating climate change, one of the priorities is to combat air pollution, because when we reduce air pollution, we will reduce emissions, and in terms of health also, it has a benefit. So it's two birds with one stone. Is this enough? Thank you. Burak Bey, can I speak from here if it's okay? Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Burak Gürkan. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very informative. Can I get a clicker to change something? Well, I would like to pick up from where our professor left. Well, our professor talked about the need for collaborative work to solve the problems. I represent engineers in this picture today because my company works in the field of engineering mainly. If you allow me, I would like to start from the topic today. Maybe that's why you're here, making cities heroes. That's the topic. Heroes reminds me of my cartoon favorite childhood characters like Batman, for instance. A hero, that is a person and at the same time a superhero. Batman is always with Robin. I never think of Batman alone. I remember Batman with his assistant, Robin. And in order to be Batman, it's not enough that you're rich or powerful. You need someone to help you, to assist you. And in thinking about today's subject, if we're going to make cities heroes, in order for cities to become heroes, what kind of help or assistance do they need? That's what I would like to talk about. There are several units, several parties involved to make cities heroes. There are municipalities, public institutions, people, communities, social units. There are private sector, employees. There are so many different stakeholders involved, but I will focus on the private sector mainly today. In order to make a city a hero, the private sector can play the role of Robin and can make Batman Batman and make the city hero. How can private sector play this role? In fact, what does the private sector do for climate? This is our main subject. I want to talk about my own company. It's called Grundfos. It is the company that produces the highest number of pumps in the world, the water pumps. It is Grundfos that produces the highest number of pumps in the world. So what does this have to do with climate change? What do I have to do in this panel? In fact, that's what we're exactly doing. That's why we exist. We would like to prevent climate change. We want to do something about climate change, and we want to ensure people access clean water. In fact, when we talk about climate change and urban work, water is an inevitable part of this equation. And everything that is about water and every solution about water involves pumps, for sure. If you notice on the screen, you see our reason for being, Grundfos. There is no pump in this sentence. Our vision is not producing pumps. There are two problems in the world, and we want to bring solutions to them. One is making sure that people access clean water, and the other is finding solutions for climate change. We're not producing pumps. We're working for you and for the world, basically. So how can a pump company solve water problems and climate problems in the world? That's what I will talk about, and then go into the details. In fact, there is one thing that pumps are doing mainly, carrying water from point A to point B. That's what pumps do, basically. And in doing this, pumps spend a high level of power. Centrifugal pumps are used in the world. I will give figures soon. Pumps are used everywhere in the world. When you come to this facility, you were washing your hands, and it was thanks to the pump that you had water running from the tap. Or the water that you're drinking, that was carried by a pump from one place to another, or when you're taking a shower as well. Or the circulation, the water used in circulation for the heating and cooling of this room is again run by a pump. So, in fact, the electricity that is used in the world is provided thanks to the pump. And one of the main roles of pumps when it comes to climate change is the climate itself, because when we move water from one point to another, in floods, you need to evacuate this water using pumps. Or when there is drought, you carry water to the drought area using pumps again. So in the root of many problems, there is problem of access to clean water in many parts of the world. And one of the easiest ways to solve this is carrying water to those people. There are 663 million people who cannot access clean water today, and 2.4 billion people are living away from basic clean life conditions. This is a very high number, and its impact on climate means, these people are working in very unhealthy conditions, and the behaviors that lead to climate change are no priority in their lives because they have very different priorities. And this is like a domino effect, and it is actually leading to the main water and climate problems in the world. Our professor talked about this very well. We experience this mostly in the cities because that's where there is the highest population, that's where most of the energy is consumed, the cities. And there are those that are most affected by climate change. There are the cause of the climate change, and they're subject to the outcomes of this climate change at the same time. We talked about electricity, and the pumps are using a lot of electricity. They're used in many areas in the world. However, interesting statistics for you, perhaps you may not know, the electricity that is used in the world, 10% of that is consumed by pumps. Of all the electricity that is used in the world, it is 10% is consumed by pumps. You don't see pumps because they're under the buildings, in boiler rooms, or they're hidden somewhere. But 10% of all the electricity in the world is a very serious number. And our main problem beyond this electricity is that these pumps are not efficient at all. What do I mean by efficiency? You use a pump carrying water from point A to point B, and it's working all the time. But if it's not a smart pump, if it's not efficient, if it's not using updated digital technologies, it is running all the time, and they're consuming this electricity all the time. And unfortunately, the biggest source to use electricity today is fossil fuels, natural gas, oil, and related, coal. So these fossil fuels have this carbon dioxide effect, the carbon footprint, and you can imagine the impact of that. So these pumps using 10% of the electricity in the world, What can they do in order to support this? This is what they can do. I said this before. It is us that that carries most of the water from A to B, our company, and we're just saying we wish the world used only our pumps. I'm just saying something methodological. If that were the case, that would be the highest digital technology used, and we could reduce the amount of electricity consumed.
Grundfos olmasına gerek yok.
So the pumps that use the technology that we use would be enough to decrease the consumption of power in the world by 5%. That would mean that we wouldn't need hundreds of coal power plants, natural gas power plants in the world. We wouldn't need them anymore. So the effect of pumps on the world is quite big. So we support two important things as the company: the sustainable development goals of the United Nations, the 6th one and the 13th one. So first of all, the one about water and the one about climate change. On the side of the climate change, we focus on efficiency and reducing our carbon footprint. Here you can see some examples. When we take a look at cities, we can see that we use electricity for pumps in cities, but at the same time we lose water because of pumps. I'm not going to give you an example of Istanbul, but in general figure related to Turkey. In Turkey, the amount of water that we use in the system, only 40% of it comes to you. So 60% or 70% in average of that water gets lost because of leakages. And one of the most important reasons behind this is the pumps, the wrongly used pumps. So it is very important to use pumps in an efficient and correct manner. I would like to show you something else. As you know, access to clean water is very important. This is one of the areas on which we focus. I just would like to take another 30 seconds to talk about this. I was talking to my friend, thinking about what to show you as my last slide. I wanted to show you a photo of my sons, but then I gave up on that because this would be recorded and then this would be on the internet, so I gave up. But I have 3 sons, and every morning when I go to work, I think about these 3 sons of mine. And I would like to do something good for the world. I would like them to live happily in this city after I'm gone. This is why I go to work. And for me, this means producing pumps, selling pumps in the private sector. I believe that all of you have a reason to wake up every morning. If we want next generations to live happily, then we need to work on climate change and water problem. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Actually, when you started your speech, you said that you were a representative of the private sector. Actually, this is a crossroads of many sectors. When we talk about water, we are talking about an integral part of human life. There is a dimension of agriculture, food, industry, urban life. So, not only about your company, but generally speaking about the private sector, how much effort, how much time do we spend on this? How much R&D do we spend on this? I believe that there are some companies who allocate resources for this field, but there are some who do not at all as well. So what kind of a picture do you see when you take a look at the private sector? Actually, as compared to 10 years ago, it's very good. I would like to talk about my own company. You said R&D. We invest in technologies. In these technologies, we invest half of our profits only in R&D in this field. Grundfos is doing this. But also other companies. to neutralize or reduce carbon emissions. We put certain targets, and other companies as well, they set certain targets before them in order to reduce their carbon emissions. They would like to, for example, become carbon neutral by 2025. This is our target as well. And by 2030, we would like to have minus carbon prints. This is one of our goals. But the only problem is that companies, they realize this, but unfortunately the number is still not that high. Global companies, corporate companies, they do this better, but local and smaller companies, unfortunately, they are late in acting in this field. And unfortunately, they form the biggest part of the total economy. I'm not going to go into details, but this does not only mean that you're doing good things for the environment. This is also a good business model, if there are any business people listening to me right now. Companies that are investing in climate are going to survive in the long term. So I'm going to call up on all the companies to act fast in this field. So thank you very much. Gamze, it's now your turn. The floor is yours. Hello, my name is Gamze Çelik Yılmaz. Today, like other valuable speakers, I'm going to talk to you about climate change, but rather than defining what it is, I would like to talk about where it can go. I would like to talk to you about certain concepts. I would like to raise awareness in certain topics. I had prepared my speech in English, but I can see that the number of our international guests is limited, so I would like to deliver my speech in Turkish. Climate change. So what is it? Is it only a problem of polar bears? It is not only about polar bears. This is what I'm going to talk to you about today. Or is it a problem of sinking cities? No, it's not. I'm going to talk to you about what it's about. Ms. Yurdanur talked about the increase in greenhouse concentrations in the atmosphere, so I'm going to skip about that part. I'm going to skip the mechanism part as well. Here, I would like to talk about why climate change is problematic. This is an existing circle, actually. This circle that you see is representing the temperature averages in the world. So there is 11 degrees of difference between the bottom part and the top part. Here is the problem that we have. As you know, starting from the mid-19th centuries, in 150 years, we achieved 1 degree of increase. But 11 degrees happens in 130,000 years. So this change happened too fast in the last 150 years. This is why climate change is problematic, because the ecological systems, they did not have time to adapt. People did not have time to adapt. Animals did not have time to adapt. This is why it's problematic. So what is happening? I'm not going to say what is going to happen, because it has already started. So I said what is happening. Droughts, yes, we know about those. Very extreme droughts. The poles are melting down. We are faced with extreme weather conditions. Our cities are starting to get underwater. This is not only because of the seawater, but because of weather conditions that we have. We have fires in forests, threatening our forests. Let's take a look at more specific example. This is from Artvin, a photo from last week. It was inundated last week. Another photo from Artvin. As you can see, the floods can even destroy buildings like an earthquake, or you can lose land. because of these extreme weather conditions. This is from Tekirdağ. We get floods all the time in Tekirdağ, in fact. The reason is that rivers coming to Tekirdağ from the Eastern Europe or Mid-Europe, the ice masses there, they melt down too fast. This is the problem of Tekirdağ. But this is not the case for Artvin. Before it was every 2 or 3 years, now it's every year. And this is from Marmaris. This is from last summer. Tornadoes. We thought that it only happened in oceans, but now it's happening in our country too. I wouldn't want to own this boat. So the problem is that these extreme conditions, they are now becoming a habit for us, and we were not ready for it. This is from 2017. You remember the hail that we had in Istanbul, and this plane, it could have gone down, but thank God it didn't. So what is at stake? Let me talk about this. As we are talking about cities, we put these items, but there are too many at stake actually. The infrastructure is at stake. The food chain, it is at risk of going bad. Access to clean water, healthy water is at stake. Our ecosystems are changing. Animals living in certain habitats, they now have to migrate and they can either survive or not. The level of diseases and deaths has increased, and the happiness of people, it has decreased as well. The happiness level has decreased as well. So we always think that climate change is a problem of animals and plants, and it will not affect people that much. But actually, climate change is affecting all ecosystems, all economic sectors that are related to it. So it is worsening the problems, already existing problems, and they are worsening the economic systems, all kinds of economic systems. So which ones are those? The infrastructure, agriculture, forestry, livestock, fisheries, energy, tourism, transport, health, and even insurance. Why insurance, you might think? Maybe you're aware of this. In the recent years, because of the extreme weather incidents, many farmers have been affected, infrastructure has been affected, buildings have been affected. So people are now including this item in their insurance policies. So the insurance system is treating this as a risk now. So the insurance system is affected as well. I will focus on the two of these sectors because there are too many details, and unfortunately I don't have time to go over them one by one. Roads in cities are affected, bridges as well, railways, all kinds of infrastructure related to water, clean water, polluted water, all of them. This is not only about natural disasters, but hot temperatures, extremely hot temperatures or extremely cold temperatures, they're all affecting these systems. Of course, extreme weather conditions can create deaths. This is a problem, but other than that, for local governments or for national governments, the cost of infrastructure is going up too. For insurance, or for regular maintenance and repairs, the costs go up. Or when they build new roads, they have to think about climate change. They need to build buildings that are resilient to colder or hotter temperatures. we have started doing this without even noticing it, actually. Another important issue is agriculture. I'm not going to go into the other sectors. The agriculture will be the last one. As you know, we lose yield in agriculture. You can say, yes, this has an economic result, but it is not only economic, unfortunately. I would like to talk to you about the economy and the social dimension. Access to food is deteriorated, and this means socioeconomic results. It's not only about hunger. So here is what we can say. Climate change is not only an ecologic problem, it's an economic, social, and environmental problem. So this is going to affect in all fields, and this is going to worsen our already existing problems. Here is another dimension of the climate change. As you know, in Syria, between 2007 and 2010, there was a serious drought. And studies showed us that because of this drought, agriculture and livestock, it died altogether. People, as a result, had economic problems, imbalances, and this caused conflicts, even armed conflicts. Of course, there were other reasons, but this caused conflicts too. So climate change is not only an economic, social, environmental problem, it can become a security problem as well. Of course, it is not the only reason. You have to have other factors, but it can be a triggering factor, and it can create armed conflicts. So what do we have to do? We should adapt to climate change. What does this mean? Everything that we can do in order to decrease our damage. So what do we adapt? We adapt the things that are most valuable to us. For one city, it could be infrastructure. For another, it could be biodiversity or tourism. So you need to balance out your priorities. So what do we adapt to? To floods, to droughts, to extremely hot temperatures, to what? So you should define what is significant for you. For your city, for your region, what is the most significant thing? You should define that. It could depend on cities. I worked in the Balkans region before. One city had two different problems in two different areas. One part had to develop a mechanism against drought, and the other one had to develop a mechanism against floods. So who should adapt? Everybody has things to do, actually, but we need to consider the following. Greenhouse reduction measures, they are handled nationally, at a national scale, but unfortunately, adaptation has to be local, because, as I said before, the measures can differ from one city to another, one region to another. So how should we do it? How should we adapt? First of all, you need to analyze the economic and ecological systems effect of the climate change. If you do not know the effects, you can't do anything. And then we should estimate the costs for no action and various adaptation scenarios. And then we should decide on which actions to take. And we should start with the most optimal method. There are some bottlenecks for climate change adaptation. First of all, uncertainty, scientific uncertainty. Our projections can project for 30 years, 40 years, or 50 years at the most, but or 50 years. But our farmers, I mean the farmers all around the world, they need to know what's going to happen next year naturally. And there is not one single solution. Various climate change conditions can have various effects in different parts of the world. Of course, we need capacity building, technical capacity building, financial capacity building, and human resources increase. I'm going to say this part in English.
Wrong. Yani siz çok fazla belirsizlik var, biz ne yapacağımızı bilmiyoruz, karar veremiyoruz, en iyisi bir şey yapmayalım derseniz kesinlikle.
So, if you do nothing, you are going to lose, that's for sure. Because the cost of doing nothing is higher than doing something that is approximately right. We have to start with the easiest part. This is the best way to go. And climate change requires multi-stakeholder solutions, especially when it comes to adaptation. We cannot just leave it up to local governments. Private sector, as Mr. Burak said, has a very big role to play, especially when it comes to human resources. So private sector must be involved. I would like to summarize my key messages. You are behind by 1 minute and 20 seconds, so please wrap up fast. Yes, I will just summarize it. Climate change is not only the problem of polar bears, it's a catastrophe for all life on Earth. Climate change is not happening in the future, it's happening now. So rather than doing nothing, we have to do what we can do, even if it's not much when it comes to adaptation. There is not a solution that fits all. Locally, everybody has to come up with their own solution, and we have to benefit from local experience as much as we can. Thank you very much. Now I will give the floor to Shannon McDaniel.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have to change to English. I hope that's okay. Thank you to all my panelists who have gone before me, and to the conference organizers for having us and for bringing attention to the incredible work that is going on in cities. I'd like to emphasize, continuing on the theme of the panelists that have spoken so far, around cooperation. And I want to highlight today in my conversation with you about why cities are going to be our heroes now and in the future in our work for climate change and against all the inevitable change that is coming. I am the Director of Data Strategy for the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. Our work is bringing together cities around the world and mayors that represent those cities in the effort to join together and make a world transparent platform available to everyone, so that there is a clear understanding of what cities are challenged with and what they are trying to do about it. So I think that everyone in this room, and certainly all of the passionate panelists that are on this stage, have made it very clear that climate change is here, it's happening, and it is in our future, and that we must act before the time passes us and it's too late. Oops. There we go, sorry. So the Global Covenant is made up of mayors from around the world. We have a board that is decided by mayors, and these are our strategic partners. So we represent over almost 10,000 cities around the world, almost 130 countries that participate, and cities of all sizes are welcome. So we have very big cities, mega cities, and we have very small villages, even villages of one person. And all those mayors have decided that it's important to them to be transparent about the work that happens and the efforts that they are making around climate change.
Forward.
Yes.
Left.
Backwards. Okay, thank you. I think it goes without saying that the information around climate change has increased over the last few years. And the Global Covenant has brought together the hard work that has been happening in regions around the world for many decades already. And we are an alliance of those initiatives. So we ourselves represent the city networks that are already functioning in the region and collaborating with the cities to help them in their process against deciding what they have to deal with and how they're going to deal with it. So our goal as the Global Covenant is to help cities understand that they need to mobilize, help them innovate, bring attention to the problems that they are facing, and to accelerate that climate action. For many, many years, we have talked about the possibility that climate change was going to be an issue. And as has been made clear today, that's no longer the case. We're not talking about the future, we're talking about the present. But one of the challenges that we have is that, as was said by a panelist earlier, it's often the national level of policy that has to occur in order for change to be happening at the city level. But it's now time for the national governments to understand that most of the world's population lives in cities. There is a clear increasing trajectory of that continuing to be the case, and it's predicted that by the end of this century, nearly 80% of the world's population will be living in cities. So the problem is more important than ever that we help cities become resilient and help them understand what they need to do in order to prepare for the changes that are coming in climate, and also to have policies in place that are supported from the national governments and elevated through the local governments so that we can do things such as cooperate together to tackle this global challenge. The Global Covenant, therefore, acts as the unifying voice to bring attention to the work that cities are already doing. Many, many cities around the world have long since identified that these changes need to happen at the local level, and they have now a platform where they can show the engagement that they've already had with their citizens and in developing the identification for what needs to happen. And as such, we have 3 different programs that we promote through the Global Covenant. They are the Innovate for Cities, the Invest for Cities, and the Data for Cities platforms. And these are in keeping with what was spoken about today. And that is that cities need to cooperate and learn from each other. They need the intervention at the local level from city officials. We need policy changes in order to make these changes happen. And we need the support of the private sector and the academic sector in order to realize the innovation that's needed for us to rise to this challenge. So the first thing that we've done as the Global Covenant is to establish a set of standards. For those of you who are scientists in the room, it will probably come as no surprise that cities for many, many years have not been reporting data in the same way. So what this means is that it's very hard to understand from one city to the next the differences in the data or what the data means. In other words, what are the greenhouse gases in one city compared to the greenhouse gases in another? So now we have a platform through the Global Covenant of Mayors that focuses specifically on this data standard. The idea being that you can understand very clearly what cities are facing in terms of their emissions, what that looks like over time as they're taking action against the emissions or mitigating their emissions, and also around adaptation and building resilience. A third pillar we have is that around access to energy, which is also a crisis in many parts of the world. And that part is still being developed, but will be released next year. But the idea is that what we call the Common Reporting Framework, allows for this global standard which defines what information should be collected and what information should be reported on a global platform so that everyone can transparently see how cities are progressing across the world. We've developed several tools to help cities do some of the hardest work that they face. So cities have to report in the emissions sector around buildings, transport, and waste subsectors, because these are the 3 areas where cities have the highest greenhouse gas emissions, and they're also the 3 areas where cities have the most impact and are able to put in mitigation strategies. There are many, many parts of city operations that a city doesn't have a lot of control over, but with buildings and transport and waste, these are the areas where they do have control. So we partnered with Google to develop the Environmental Insights Explorer. And right now it only has 5 cities, but it is under development to include more in cities all around the world. The idea being that you can go and find data that is often really difficult for cities to find. So this is addressing the professor's first point that getting city data is very hard. It's a known problem in this field, and our partnership with Google is helping us to populate this data and make it freely available so that cities themselves and all citizens, anyone who wants, can go and pull the information and understand what the emissions are for those cities. This is just an example of the buildings piece where it shows the outline of the city boundary, shows the hot spots, and if you click on some of the data, you will dig down deeper into the different types of buildings and the emissions that are represented from those buildings. Another tool that we've developed is with the World Resources Institute, and it's to address a similar issue. Many of our cities are very small, and so they don't have people that can develop their emissions inventory where they report on the gases that are being emitted in their cities. So we are developing an effort to take national data sets and regional data sets and downscale it for the cities. Again, this is another freely available tool, and it's developed right now for 6 countries in the world, and we're working to try to develop it for all countries in the world eventually. But it's a lot of effort to acquire this data because often, as you can imagine, the national governments also don't want to share this information and feel that it could put a lot of information out there without the proper safety nets. But this information is critical for cities to be able to understand what is happening in their own space. We also have a partnership that we've announced just last week around financing. So one piece is the data for cities. Another huge piece is the financing. So what's this progress that cities make is they do an assessment of their emissions and their adaptation strategy, and then they report that and they develop a climate action plan to try to state what they're going to do to help progress their actions against climate change in their city. It's very easy-ish to come up with problems than how you're going to address them. It's much, much harder to develop projects that you can get funding for to help you actually carry them out. So this piece on financing is absolutely critical, and it's one that we have worked very hard to try to help unlock. So some of the funds that we have released in particular is a gap fund to help cities develop their projects further and then apply for funding to the global banks that have money set aside waiting to be implemented to help address problems of climate action. I only have a minute left, so I'll go very quickly. The final piece is on Innovate for Cities. We have this is probably the most critical to this panel up here on stage, but we have a partnership that we are developing with academia, the private sector, national governments, policymakers, NGOs, and cities themselves to help identify what the actual most critical problems are for cities. In many research in nations, it's difficult to apply for or to do research on items that you don't have funding for. So sometimes the problems or challenges that cities face need solutions, but maybe the academics don't realize that, or the proper funding stream isn't available for them to get the grants to do that work. So we're trying to work together to see what can be identified, how we get that into the national policy of different countries, how we get private industry engaged, and most importantly, how we train the next generations of economists and scientists and engineers to help address this issue and make it part of the national curriculum in every country. So thank you very much. I will keep to my time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. In fact, you mentioned a few pillars. One of them is data, so you already have a tool to, generate some data. The other pillar is the funding, and you also have some means to, provide the funding. I believe that the third pillar will be convincing the local and, central governments. So the data is there, some sort of funding is there, but how are you going to convince the policymakers to take action?
That's a fantastic question. As you all might know, I think with the Paris Agreement several years ago, we are coming up to the next evaluation of whether or not the nationally determined contributions that countries made at the time is sufficient for us to stay below 2 degrees in the coming century. I think we can ubiquitously all agree that it's very difficult to do that without an increase in ambition and commitment on climate change action. So our work is very much around reporting all the work that cities are doing to a neutral body like the UN. So we work with the UNFCCC, the Climate Change Unit, and they report nationally or globally on the work that cities are doing. And that is, the idea is showing that we can increase, the nations can increase at a national level the contributions that they are planning to make and the ambition they have, because they can start to rely on cities as the place where that transformational change can occur.
Erdem Bey, sizi davet edebiliriz.
Merhabalar.
Hi, my name is Erdem. I'm working in the UNDP as a climate change specialist. Well, I would like to continue Gökhan Bey's last question. I would like to give some concrete examples as to how we work with cities. It's going to be based on data and examples. Well, if you were part of the discussions in the morning, there was the Secretary General of Marmara Municipalities Association, and there was a common theme in the first session. Yes, there is change happening, there are risks, there is pressure on local governments, there is an increase of expectations. That's what we've talked about, that's what they touched upon. What can we do here? What should happen? That was also voiced. In fact, Gamze Hanım and the panelists mentioned this. This is actually a situation that we're not used to. The climate is changing, and what are we to do about this? And we're expected to find solutions for this. Perhaps you have followed, there were climate strikes across the world. It was a record high protest. It was the widest participation in many parts of the world. Greta gave speeches in New York, in the United Nations meeting, and please listen to them, because that's very important. You can see how the youth is positioning themselves, and you can listen to their priorities and values. There is a generation difference between us. A 60-year-old, a 40-year-old, and a 20-year-old do not look at the world from the same perspective. They have different realities, different outlooks, different values, and that's how we are supposed to come up with change. And this is also a good business model. The private sector has to understand the expectations of the new generation. They're guaranteeing clients that way, but they're also changing their business models. This is true for the local governments as well. In the last years, 2016 to 2018, they were actually record years in terms of the climate disasters, and there is more than 2,700 disasters in the world, in the country. Gamze Hanım showed in her slides, from Artvin to Tekirdağ, from the east to the south, from the west to the north, everywhere is affected. This also was on the agenda of the local elections. Today we see new mayors, and they're talking about sustainable cities, resilient cities. They don't exactly know what they're supposed to do, but they know there is such an expectation on the side of the citizens. And we know this through the demands that we receive from Istanbul, Ankara, Izmir, and other metropolitan municipalities. We're in direct contact with them because they're coming and asking us, what are we supposed to do? So that was an issue in the local elections as well. Perhaps you remember Gamze Hanım showed some images about Artvin, and you've seen the disasters in Düzce. It's not all about climate change either. I mean, yes, there is this urbanization problem, maybe some illegal structures. These are also issues that increase fragility and increase vulnerability and risk. So it's not about the heavy precipitation. The damage is not all about that. Part of it is caused by us, the urbanization issues, lack of plans, and easy gains. So we would like to touch upon those as well. I would like to start with this Sustainable Development Goals slide. Yes, there is need for change, and municipalities have to have a new understanding. In fact, that's what lies at the root. Perhaps you follow, there were the Millennium Development Goals for 15 years, and it was an average success. It wasn't very successful in implementing those goals in general, United Nations and all the actors. So there is a main difference of mentality. It is not really result-oriented, but impact-oriented. Result-oriented means how many buildings have you erected, how many houses, so you can quantitatively measure them. Being impact-oriented means about how you impacted the quality of life of those people, how you serve their values and priorities. So when you are impact-oriented, our systems are behind. There is the 11th five-year development plan that is recent. There are the strategic plans of municipalities, of organizations. It's a very good place to begin. So in terms of success, what is defined there? What are the criteria that define success? And are they impact-oriented or result-oriented? It's a very simple question, and we can ask this for our own businesses as well. At the end of a month, at the end of a year, what is success for you at the workplace? And are you defining this in the quantitative or qualitative sense? So in fact, Greta and the new generation, they're saying we want to define it in more qualitative sense. And what are the means of doing this? As UNDP Turkey, we have been working on climate change for very long years together with the Ministry of Environment. We are generating knowledge. For one thing, we would like to have data-based actions and decisions. As Shannon and others have mentioned, the United Nations Climate Change Framework Agreement we present reports to them. We have sector-based analyses. Recently, together with TUSIAD and TruConfed, we have conducted a study about the resilience of NGOs, new risks, new priorities. It's on the internet. We also provide technical support to ministries. So it's about shaping the political documents. That's how we actually contribute, and we build partnerships. I want to touch upon this very briefly. The previous panelists also did this. In fact, this shows the systems aspect of climate change, and this is our beginning point. On the left-hand side, we see the climate elements like heat, the sea level, and precipitation parameters, and the changes there. There are two changes. One is the normal seasonal changes, and then there are those extreme changes during disasters. The first impact is ecosystems. You cannot think of a solution without thinking about the ecosystems. So after that, there is the socioeconomic systems that build cities. Burak Bey talked about the water system. There are also energy systems, food systems, health systems. So we can think of it, the city, as a system of systems. So what makes a city interesting as a system of systems is that although most elements are part of engineering, the city itself is a very organic structure. You cannot really plan it very precisely. We have 30 metropolitan municipalities, and we have maps where they are located in this climate map, because we have to come up with unique solutions. So there are these 30 metropolitan municipalities. We see the climate change. The brown one is the Marmara region. The pink one is Akdeniz, the yellow one is the Anatolian climate, and green is the Black Sea climate. So there are actually 4 different climate zones in Turkey. There are 26 water basins and 81 provinces. And beyond that, there are the city and region concepts, Çukurova, Mersin, Izmir and its vicinity. So this is not something that can be solved at the administrative level. Sometimes we have to overcome the administrative level, especially to touch upon the ecological systems. As you see, there is a lot to do. You see the European Union climate plans as a reference at the bottom. Shannon also mentioned in 2018, in 26% of the EU countries, there was a plan for climate change, and in cities with more than 150,000, 40% of them had this plan for harmonization with climate change. We, on the other hand, have a lot more to cover. We have a long distance to cover in that regard. I want to give 4 examples. I want to finish there. I won't be able to present everything, but you will probably have this presentation anyway. Next to Gaziantep, there is Mersin province. I can't share the visual, I'll just say it verbally. We have conducted a risk analysis as for critical infrastructures. Mersin is a port city. 50% of the industry in Ankara comes from Mersin port, and the other 50% goes to Izmir. Mersin port itself has an impact area of 600 kilometers. To the east of Ankara, the Anatolian Tigers, Anatolian cities, the exit and entrance is through the Mersin port, and we've conducted our risk analysis on that basis, because when there's flooding in Mersin port, which happens every year, there is a serious multiplied effect in terms of risk and damage. We conducted another study in the Küçükmenderes Basin in Izmir. We checked the critical agricultural products. So in Izmir, in the water basin, there are some products that are only grown in that region, and we looked at how they would be affected by climate. Such studies are also conducted in Europe. We read those studies and we think of how to adapt them to Turkey, and we do that. The third study is from organized industrial sites in Istanbul. In our country, there are about 300 organized industrial sites, and if you include the technoparks and the specialization areas, so there are some areas where you can have a mass impact. When you convince the regional directorates of such organized sites, if you collaborate with them, they will have an impact on the SMEs under their shelter, and thereby protect them. So we are aiming at such collective or total effect. Organized industrial sites and municipalities are our points of entry today. The basic infrastructure services in municipalities, water, gas, electricity, natural gas, wastewater, we're trying to reinforce those aspects in municipalities. Perhaps you watched this last summer. There was this flood in Kapalı Çarşı, the Grand Bazaar. We went there, we took photos, we talked to the merchants, asked what the problem was. Those people are saying, we take care of our own problems. The municipality should reinforce the infrastructure as soon as possible. They should make this stronger. So that's what we're focusing on. This is the kind of relationship we have with municipalities, and the SMEs are in our center. You see some figures here. I hope that the presentation will be shared with you. SMEs are the backbone of the Turkish economy, so we focused on that. And 99% of registered economy is there, and it's mostly family companies. Unfortunately, the SME companies that are affected by the disasters are in the cities. We actually take care of cities and SMEs in the cities. 80% of those SMEs are closed down. This is a major problem. They have low resilience, and 8 households' income is represented for every SME. So we want to strengthen them. This is our approach, having the SMEs in the center, working with municipalities for infrastructure services, technoparks, organized industrial sites, special regions, federations and associations that SMEs are member to, like the Businessmen Association, etc. Well, I went a bit fast. Sorry about that. I'll conclude here. I'll get the questions later, maybe. We have actually 2 minutes, so I can ask you a question. You added the SME dimension to the presentation. You increased the number of stakeholders, actually. When there are so many stakeholders, when developing strategies for climate change, you need a model for mitigation or adaptation. So within the framework of UNDP's experiences in other countries, in Turkey, municipalities or central government does not have a long-term strategy. So what kind of model can you recommend? Or is there a model that you can actually recommend from UNDP's work in another country? Well, we think that models should be unique to countries because Turkey is a unique economy. It has its unique city structure. It has its unique elements, but we can of course make use of some examples. We looked at the Mexico and Philippines examples. Mexico City or Manila in Philippines, and they are also faced with disaster threats like Istanbul, and they're 10 years ahead of us. They have insurance penetration. They are 10 years ahead of Turkey. We see their models. We see that they're very original. In Turkey, from Artvin to Edirne, from Konya to Antalya, from Samsun to Antalya, let's say, there are several city typologies. It's important to understand them well and come up with solutions for those so we can address a broader area like this. Several years ago, we discussed this with the State Planning Organization. When it comes to climate change and risks, Turkey can become a brand. How? Balkans, Central Asia, Middle East, North African cities, their cultural values, their socio-culture structure is very similar to us. So if we can generate solutions here, we can collaborate with the cities there and create a regional hub. So we can do this. As for the, we're not trying to create a different page like SMEs. We're not trying to isolate them. We're just trying to figure out how they can be part of this conversation. Committee of Mayors or other programs. How can we include SMEs in these other programs? That's what we're looking into. Okay, we can continue with the general questions now. There's a question to Professor Yurdanur. I will read it. You said the data is insufficient. Why? And the second question is, are there regional plans in climate change in Turkey? What can the local governments do about this? Yes, we actually have data at the global level. Meteorology offices in all countries are conducting observations. We have satellite observations and so on. But at the city scale, we don't have sufficient data. For instance, the urban heat island, in order to identify that, we have 33 AKOM stations in Istanbul for that, but it's not enough. In order to see the picture more clearly, for instance, we can combat with climate change by reducing the urban heat island, so we need more accurate measurement systems for that. And we have modeling work, and in this modeling work, we use global data sets like the Korean data. They're about 250 meter resolution, but municipalities can make some regular measurements. And in terms of access to those, we have problems. So the data has always been a problem. When you are developing some scientific theory, in order to test that theory, you need detailed data. And when it comes to climate change and the data quality is important, it's important to make it easier to access this data, and we have to develop this habit of collecting data in general. And it's important to make it usable in climate change. There are some studies at the national scale. For instance, there is a project about the impact of climate change on water resources. It's by the Ministry of Forests, and by the end of the century, how will the climate evolve? We analyze this based on different scenarios, and now the ministry is using this for different kinds of analysis, like flood analysis or the sectors that are at risk in terms of climate change. So they're using this kind of data. And also, Istanbul municipality conducted some analyses in the past, but it's necessary to update them and detail them with the technological advancements. I think there is a question to Burak Bey. There is no name written, but you can answer this. You talked about countries that have water stress and how can we access water in the future? How can we create alternative sources? Good question. There are actually two questions here. I talked about water shortage, water losses. The first thing and the easiest thing is to protect the water that we have. And protecting that is really easy, and it is one of the most natural means. And there are several new technologies. There are some digital technologies, so the faster we go there, we can find solutions that easily. There are some new technologies as well, you know, some extreme technologies, so to speak, but over time they will be widespread. For instance, by condensating moisture in the air, they generate water, but this will take a long time to be integrated in our daily lives right now. It will take a while. So if we can use our current water resources correctly, that will be a solution. We see there is an increase in the number of people and increase in the use of water, and it's getting more and more difficult to reach underground waters because we have to go deeper and deeper. And the underground water is not an endless resource. There will be natural, rainfall so that it accumulates. It accumulates in 100 years and we consume it in 10 years. So our consumption of water or saving water, it's one of the shortest and most practical solutions that will save everyone. It's for you, Shannon.
Everyone is talking about the increasing population in cities. Is there a way of calculating the capacity of cities, and are there cities who are conducting such plans and making such forecasts, etc.?
That's a very good question. There is a lot of work that is going on around the calculation of cities, and that involves, of course, looking at migration patterns, and a lot of work that's being done around research of the climate changing patterns and how that's driving these migration patterns as well. Cities themselves, some of them, the ones with higher capacity in terms of resources, are certainly evaluating what that inflow of people looks like, because this, of course, impacts them on many, many levels, including economic impacts and also planning capacity. So I can't name specific cities that I know for certain are doing this, but I know that the work is certainly happening with cities that participate, that have a lot more resources, such as cities that are in the C40 network. They tend to be cities that are much larger and have a lot more staff that do this type of work. And certainly in the academic world, in socioeconomics, any academic institutions working in those fields, they will certainly be looking at this and modeling the capacity of cities of the future and what planning should go into those cities' development.
Bir tane Erdem Bey'e sorum var.
Question to Erdem Bey. You said that you talked to the municipality, the great metropolitan municipality. Could the economic capacity of this municipality bear these costs? The short answer is yes, because you don't need that much resource, actually. Municipalities have to go through a mentality change, an attitude change, and Izmir is the one that started this after the local elections. Konda Research Company is contributing the strategic plan development in Izmir, and they are trying to implement the participatory democracy model. You know, Konda Research Company's reports, they have field research, and using the same models, they are developing strategic plans, and they've held more than 200 meetings at the local level with people, with the citizens or different groups to identify their needs and listen to their priorities. And the municipality can do this very easily with their own resources. And if they have a serious intention, the Covenant of Mayors or international organizations, United Nations, World Bank, etc., you can easily find resources from such organizations as well. There's one thing that I would like to emphasize. We're talking about adaptation to climate change. This is at the same time a business, it's a nice market. There is a report from Turkey in 2013. It's by the European Development Bank of it is a market of $22 billion, they say, switching to more water efficient technologies in agriculture or some changes in buildings. So for private sector, this is an interesting point of entry. It's not only about expenses, they can develop new services and products at the same time. So the public-private partnerships turn to the win-win model here. And there is a lot that municipalities can also do within the framework of their own resources. There is a question to Gamze Hanım as well. There is not a name, but let me ask you. For sustainable life, what should we do as the people of Istanbul? It's a tough question, but... Well, sustainable life. Is it economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, social sustainability? Maybe it's all of those that this participant is asking, and I believe it's asking what we can do on an individual basis. First of all, we have to understand what is going on in climate. We have to see its impact in Turkey, and then we should take action on that basis. So there are some studies in that regard. The climate change strategy document of Turkey, and there was the 7th national report published in December. You can see the impact in Turkey. You can see what's done for adaptation.
Biliyorsunuz Türkiye'de
And in Turkey, you see the public sector doing something, but not many people know about it. Actually, there are many things that are being done in Turkey, so I suggest you take a look at that. After taking a picture of what's going on, we have to look at what we can do along with the civil society, because we cannot achieve so many things on our own. Yes, we can sort our own waste for environmental sustainability, but if we want to be efficient, we need to be a part of network. I'm not only talking about NGOs, even the board of a building is a committee in itself. They can do something as well. We can work with our municipalities. We can work with the village heads or the heads of the neighborhood where we live. We need collective solutions to this problem. This is why we have to work collectively. These are the things off the top of my head. And every stakeholder can do something different. If I was a part of the private sector, here's what I would do. Stakeholders, institutions, I would try to mobilize them. I would try to affect them. For example, I would try to change my supply chain, and in my specifications, I would include some items on environmental sustainability. I would also try to spread this idea to my customers. If I was a municipality, I would already be in contact with people all the time, so I would do something. So everybody can do something in their own network. This is my humble recommendation. Thank you very much. Maybe I can say a few words to wrap up. All panelists, they made their presentations, they answered questions, and they said that climate change is a multi-dimensional issue. So if you are to develop a strategy on this topic, you need to approach you need to have a multi-dimensional approach as well. This was the first one. The second one, everybody has to contribute to the solution. The public sector, private sector, academic world, individuals, they all have a role to play. Thirdly, climate change is not high on the list of priorities of Turkey. We need to work hard to move it up in the list because agriculture, energy, food, health, urban life, rural life, water dimension, all of these fields are affected by climate change. So we all have important roles to play to attract attention to this issue. I would like to thank all panelists for their presentations and answers to questions. Thank you very much.